Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Cameron Norsworthy, and this is your podcast for human performance. Being an athlete is not an easy ride. Contrary from what it may look like on the outside, being an elite athlete is full of sacrifice, hard work, and diligence that few people are willing to do. And today, we talk to Sami Palmer, a 2 times world champion, junior and senior European champion, World Cup final winner, and a former member of Great Britain's high-performance tumbling team. Her athletic career began early, driven by raw talent, fearless energy, and a deep hunger to achieve. By 12, she was competing internationally. By 15, she was one of the best in the world. But her greatest lessons didn't come from podiums. They came from the fall. A knee reconstruction, a coaching departure, skill breakdowns, and the relentless pressure of elite sport led to burnout, identity loss, and ultimately her retirement. With no clear path forward, Sami left the UK, travelled, and eventually rebuilt her life in Australia. And today, Sami is a respected leader in performance wellbeing across the Australian high-performance sports system. She brings a rare blend of lived experience, emotional intelligence, and professional expertise to help athletes and teams thrive as whole humans, not just performers. We are about to take an exclusive deep dive into Sami's story. We will talk about the hunger for medals versus the hunger for meaning, what early success gives and what it takes, supporting the person, not just the athlete, and why holistic care beats the push-harder culture. We'll also dive into identity shifts, building courage to take new paths, and lots more. So get ready, get steady, let's flow.
Flow Unleashed.
Welcome to the show, Sami.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You reached extraordinary heights as a young athlete in gymnastics. What do you remember most vividly from those early high-performance years?
There's probably a few things that come to mind. I remember it being fun. I just enjoyed it. I had an absolute love for the sport. And so I wanted to be there all day, every day. Don't get me wrong, that it was hard. Gymnastics is one of those sports that, you start young and you're in the gym sort of 25, 30 hours by the age of 9, 10, training before school. But for me, I had this very, an intrinsic drive just to keep doing more and keep learning, and the adrenaline kept me there. I was very talented, which is lucky, but I embraced it, and I think I took all the opportunities. My first international event, I was 9 years old, so I hopped on a plane over to Russia, to where my coach was from, and did a competition over there, and that was a big wake-up moment for me. I think, I trained in a very big gym, a great environment that was, we had heating and all the things. Went over to Russia, and they sort of were in a cold building. They had handmade leotards and no hand guards on the bars. And I was like, wow, I'm really lucky where I am. They didn't complain. They just got on and they trained. And I think even that early exposure to different environments and different cultures really made me grateful. And when I got back, just made me really embrace things even further and go, wow, I've actually got more opportunity here than probably a lot of other people around the world. But I just enjoyed it. And I think getting those experiences so young kept me wanting more. I was always looking for what's next. How can I get better? It didn't always go right. I remember my very, very first ever competition. I came dead set last place. But they did the call up of everyone, and you sort of lined up from bottom to top. And I remember standing so vividly with my piece of paper, my certificate, and looking up at the podium and the girls and going, oh, that's where I want to be. And so, like I said, I was just very driven. I just loved it. I loved being upside down. It sort of shifted. I've got like two recollections of my early high performance years. So I was in the artistic gymnastics squad. I went to Russia, Hungary, Austria, competing in artistic gymnastics all before I was 12. But I was missing probably the artistic flair from gymnastics. I was great at the acrobatics, at the tumbling, at vault, but anytime I had to leap, spin or dance, which is obviously a big part of artistic gymnastics, it was not my strong suit, let's put it like that. So I started tumbling for fun. I just did one competition and happened to be very good. And within 6 months was representing Great Britain at the World Age Championship 5 days after my 12th birthday. And I just fell in love with this new sport and the adrenaline, the excitement, and I didn't have to leap and dance and spin. So I was in my element and I just really embraced it. It was in South Africa and we got to go over and watch the senior competition and then start the training and have the junior competition, and I was just blown away. And from there on, I just knew that was where I wanted to be. I had a lot of success. So I came 7th at that World Championships, having only trained for sort of 6 months in the sport. And returning home, I remember everyone's going, wow, that's incredible. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. It's really cool. But I wanted to get to the final. Like I could have done better. And I had this burning desire to just do more. So the following year, I was lucky enough to get selected for the Junior European Championship. And we changed my tumbling routine the day before the competition. And in the competition itself, I actually forgot what my path was. So I did 3 skills and I just stopped in the middle of the floor. I looked at the national coach and I said, oops. And he sort of said, oops, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. I actually forgot. Like I forgot what I was doing. And I think that was a bit of an experience. That was probably a moment where I realized that communication is quite important. To change a tumbling routine the day before the competition. Did it sit well with me? Probably not. Was I courageous enough to have a conversation about it? Absolutely not. And I think that just shows, I was very young. I was 13. I was getting whisked away at these events. But I kept going anyway, got back, sort of started communicating a little bit more, learned from that little error. And it was 2001 when I went across to the World Championships again. So it was every 2 years back then. Had a blast. I went over with one goal, and that goal was to make the finals because I missed out by 1 place in South Africa 2 years prior. And I just had a good time and I enjoyed it. I'd got some friends on the team by that time, and just embraced the experience. Qualified in 2nd place, and there was a big hype and a buzz and everyone's going, you could really get a medal here. And we sat in the warm-up for the finals and I had a can of Coke and a Mars bar. And the coach is going, you got to warm up, you got to do this, and what are you doing? And my parents are going, why aren't you taking this seriously? And we've paid all this money for you to get here. And I said, because I reached my goal. My goal was to get to the final, and I'm just here to now just enjoy it and have fun. And in my head, I'm calculating, okay, well, I think the Russian might do this, and this person's doing this. So if I can try this routine, which I haven't put the combination together for, I thought, well, let's just give it a shot. Like, let's just go. I've reached my goal. It's a bonus. So I was very calm and collected. No pressure from myself internally. Maybe there was pressure externally, but it didn't matter to me. And I ended up winning. So I took the gold and, it's just, I think that realization for me, you have to be enjoying what you're doing. Because if you take away the fun, that's where the elements of the stress and the pressure can build up. And I think have quite a big impact on performance.
Amazing story there. So often nowadays there's so much stress and pressure around the outcome, both from the parents and the coaches, that training's laborious and competitions is performance anxiety in-field sort of arenas. And what do you think were the key ingredients back then that facilitated that playfulness?
Yeah, I think environment. Like, we had a very good group of girls. We're in a squad, a couple of boys too. And we just always picked each other up, had a laugh, found the funny things. If my Russian coach listens to this, he was lovely, lovely guy. Like, I had my coach from the age of 6, so he was, a little bit like a father to me, knew me better than anyone. We had quite a good relationship, but he had quite a thick Russian accent, so you had to listen in quite closely to him. But he also sort of used to spray a bit when he was talking, and a few bits of saliva was here and there. And so we would joke and we'd say, Vov wants to talk to you. Have you got your umbrella? And you just keep it light, keep it fun.
Yeah, keep it light.
Yeah, and there were days that I didn't have a good day. There were days that some teammates didn't have a good day, but you're there for each other. And I think that's a real key ingredient, because you spend so much time training, doing what you do. When you were learning new skills, you don't just get it straight away. You fall, you do silly things, and it's embracing those moments. I think there were plenty of times where we would make fun of each other. You try something new for the first time and you sort of land not the right way up, and, just don't take it too seriously. I think, yes, we were competing on the world stage, but you have to enjoy it. And I think, again...
And you were probably competing against each other as well, no?
Yeah, each other, other countries. You sort of obviously meet the same people on the international circuit over and over, and you form relationships, and, you might have your arch nemesis in there. It was me and one Russian all the time against each other. But you just create those relationships where it's, it's mutual respect, but there's friendship. And those friendships carry you through.
But then everything changed after an injury.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it did. So I was so excited for 2004. So I, as we've spoken about, had a very great junior career, and 2004 was it. I was age eligible to step into senior, and I had been waiting for so long. So the British tumbling team, their seniors were very strong. And at that point, there was a lot of funding behind it. So I just couldn't wait. I was almost wishing away my years, waiting to get to senior. So stepped in, and it was the year there was a European Championship, British Championships, and I was on, a really good trajectory. And then we had our British Championships in March, and I had a couple of new tumbling passes. I was going to be doing a new skill, but in the qualification round, I did my routine, and as I landed in the competition run, dislocated my knee. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh, that really hurts. And I sat down ever so elegantly, sort of clutching my knee, facing the audience, so trying to be exceptionally brave. Physio came over, sort of popped back in, and I got, the carry off and the big clap from the stadium, which you never want to have to be in that position. And I sat down icing it, watched the rest of the competition, and I remember saying to the physio that night, I said, so can we just ice it and we'll just strap it and I'll just compete tomorrow? Am I going to be okay to compete tomorrow? And my coach was there, my mum was there, the physio was there, the doctor was there. We had a few people from British Gymnastics, and they were all just looking at me, and they no, Sam, you need to rest, and we need to see what the outcome of this is. And I was like, but it's fine. But it was like a balloon. I couldn't wait there. So I had to withdraw from the competition, which I was just absolutely gutted about. I'd been waiting for so long for this moment. I stayed positive at that point. So the European Championships were still sort of 3-4 months away. And I remember thinking, I can get better, I can get back, I'll still make the team. But unfortunately, we had to wait a couple of weeks for the swelling to go down. And I got a scan done, and the scan came back, and it was a full rupture to my anterior cruciate ligament. And I remember the phone call I got. So it was, I've got really good news for you. It's not your meniscus. I was like, okay, brilliant. What is it? Oh, you don't have a ligament left. Oh, what does that mean? And yeah, so it was surgery, I think within about 6 weeks, I was getting my knee operated on. They took my hamstring and drilled it through and twined it round, and they asked if I wanted a video of the surgery, to which I politely declined. But I remember waking up from the surgery and they said it has all gone well, and I spent a few days in the hospital. And I was told it would probably be very difficult to come back and sort of tumble and put the load through it to the extent that I had been. So that in itself was quite challenging. But I remember looking at my mum, and I was quite headstrong, and saying to her, don't they know who I am? And sort of thinking, well, I'm not going to be told I can't do something and that I can't tumble again, because that was everything to me. And that was, I wasn't ready to accept that my tumbling career might be finished. So I actually moved to the National Training Centre for 3 months of intense rehabilitation. So that meant stepping away from, I was in year 12 at school at that point. I'd started studying psychology. So moved away from that, my friends, my partner at the time, my boyfriend, my family, and did this 3 months and sort of was all in on that. I parked studies a little bit because my priority at the time was get this knee better. Like, I just want to get back on the tumbling floor. So that went quite well, but I went home, and it was at that point, getting home, that things really took a turn, and I would say derailed quite quickly. I don't think I'd quite come to terms with the injury itself and what that meant. I was still hanging on to, I should have been at, the European Championships, and I just found myself in this void, and everything became really quite hard. I ended up really shifting to just socializing and going, okay, well, what's the point? What am I doing? I can't be training, so what do I do? And I think it was that moment of, I actually don't have really much else going on. And looking back, that was probably a red flag to say, you need some things outside of your athlete career. But I don't think at the time I was ready to accept that. And I don't think, there definitely wasn't enough conversations about it then, and there wasn't enough support and people helping you navigate through that. So I spent this sort of period of just going out, doing everything that I didn't do as, a sort of early adult. But I had this moment where the team still went away. They went over to the European Championships, and I wasn't following at all, really. I'd sort of almost built this wall up to protect myself around having to manage those emotions that I was going through. But the news sort of came out. The team podiumed, they got a medal, and then obviously saw all these photos of my teammates and the trip and the experience, and it was like this light switch for me of, I'm not done and I want to be back there, and I should have been on that team, and I'm not ready to not be an athlete. So after spending sort of 3 months in this big hole of avoidance and really not figuring things out, I switched. I went back in the gym. My rehab became my primary focus. I actually dropped out from studying completely and just decided to go all in. It was like, I'm going to get back there. I worked really hard and got selected for World Championships the following year. So 15 months later, I was back representing Great Britain at the Senior World Championships. Like, I finally made an international senior event. It was incredible. I came third. So I think for me, that bronze medal it beats any other title I've got, because it was that journey of getting there and getting through some challenging times. Another bombshell dropped when I got home, in that my coach, who I'd had since the age of 6, so 11 years, was moving. And there was a little bit going on in the club, some politics, and I wasn't aware at the time of everything that sort of was happening behind the scenes. So I was quite angry. I thought he was leaving me, abandoning me. What did this mean? I was then on my own. So he left. So I'd sort of fought those, 15 months to get back. And then after that, communities are quite small. So there was a lot of talk of like, oh, she's going to quit now. That's it. She won't keep progressing without her coach. And going back to that headstrong, stubborn personality of mine, I was like, well, hang on, these people are saying this. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm not ready to give up on being an athlete. So I trained on my own for 2 years. Quite challenging. Had its perks. If I didn't feel like going, I wouldn't go. But, the implications of that, you needed a level of discipline. I found myself driving 4 hours up to where the national coach and the rest of the team were. And I would train with them for 3 days, and I would come home on a Sunday night, work and juggle some sort of part-time training for 3 days of the week, and then get back in the car and do it all again. So I kept going back on the international stage, won World Cups, World Cup finals, Junior European Championships. But over that period of 2 years of having to juggle work, and I worked in a supermarket stacking shelves in the morning from 6 a.m. till 9, and then I would go and train, and then I worked a lunchtime waitressing shift, and then I'll go and train, and then I'd work in the evening at the pub as well. And it was, okay, what can I do around my training? And I think it's not spoken about enough, but employment as an athlete is very hard because you spend half the time traveling and away that you really need some flexibility. So I never really explored myself outside of being an athlete. It was, what can I do to support me being an athlete? I was never going to run a pub, but the pub shifts worked. I didn't want to be stacking shelves for the rest of my life, but it worked. So, years of juggling that, the financial pressures, not having a coach, some skill issues, all these cracks started appearing, and my love for the sport was sizzling away. And I talked about it earlier. The most important thing is that you're loving what you do, that you're enjoying it and you're having fun. But it had almost become a chore. And I knew deep down I still wanted to be the athlete. I still wanted to be on the international circuit and competing. But I wasn't in love with the sport, and I wasn't enjoying what I was doing because it was so hard. So I went to the World Championships in 2007, and I remember not wanting to really go to the World Championships, but at the same time, I felt all the time like I needed to for the team. So my score still needed to count for the team to do well. So I went over, but what that meant was having to stand on a tumble track. I'd completed one of my passes, but I needed to score a 0 on the second pass so that I was still eligible to compete in the team competition the next day. So I had to present to the judges. Now, after my first tumble, I was 2.5 marks in front of second place of the Russian. And I just remember such an overwhelm of emotion and thinking I would rather be anywhere else but here right now. But I had to walk on, and the whole stadium was completely silent. And I presented to the judges, but instead of running down to do my second tumbling routine with the twists in it, I just walked off the tumble track because I had to do that to get that 0 score. And I just remember my eyes completely welling up with tears, and, a few people tapping me on the back. Everyone was confused. The other nations were confused. The audience was confused. There was this big gasp, and I walked out and I just cried, and I sat in a hallway just crying. And I remember speaking to my mum, and she just said, I don't know what to say. And, obviously she was upset for me. And I just said to her, Mum, I can't do this anymore. As much as I want it, I can't do it. And I don't enjoy it. And so I went back from that World Championships, and I was a broken athlete, completely broken. And I actually never went back in the gym. And I remember Mum trying to encourage me to go. And she said, you've got to go back and have some conversations. And I'd shut down. And I said, I can't. And so it was hard, and it was that realization then of, who am I? Like, and I think we can get wrapped up in, I was a gymnast, I was a tumbler, I was a world champion, that was who I was. Not I'm Sami Palmer who loves doing X, Y, Z, who does gymnastics. It was like, that was who I was. And so I found myself in this just black hole. And at that time I was 20, so still very young for an athlete, and especially a tumbler. They can sort of keep going until their late 20s. but I was just empty, broken, and felt like I didn't know who I was not being a gymnast. And that was a big, big realization and a big shifting point in my life.
Yeah, what a story. And I think one that lots of people can either relate to themselves or are working with people or come across situations like it. And there's so many important points that I'd like to bring up. You know, one about this idea of when we put all of ourselves into something, we almost fuse who we are with what we're doing. Whether you're an entrepreneur starting a business, whether you're a surgeon, always wanting to be a surgeon, or an athlete, always wanting to be an athlete. And, you know, I remember personally that feeling of having lived quite an incredible life, but yet not knowing who I was. You know, when tennis kind of got ripped away from me, I was left going, well, who am I without tennis? You know, I'm used to getting achievements. I'm used to that culture. I'm used to operating within that scenario, and suddenly I'm now feeling like an ant that's been picked up from one world and dropped in another world, and everything's new. And suddenly that confidence individual is suddenly this disempowered, untrusting, protecting, insecure individual, and all because that identity and that self-construct, the self-efficacy, the self-worth, the self-identity, was a hinge to what I was doing. And it's such an important point when we look at helping athletes in today's world, or helping any youth in today's world. There's so much pressure for young people to be good and improve. And the support networks available to individuals nowadays it is growing. And obviously when we grew up, there was very little of it. You sort of had to, you know, the old English saying, just pull your socks up and get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And live with those scars. You know, so I feel like it's really, your message is really important, because often on the outside you look at people, successful people, and you make an assumption, you make a judgment that they're successful, everything must be great. But actually what's going on behind the scenes can be very, very different. I'm wondering, how has that shaped you now working with other and being in charge of the well-being of a whole suite of athletes?
I think there's probably many different elements and many things there. One of, I think, my biggest learnings about myself when I was in that sort of period of, you know, derailing myself throughout dealing with the injury, and, you know, in my head knowing, okay, I still want to be an athlete, but actually my behaviors and what I was doing were not complementing what I wanted to be achieving. And it took the team going away and winning for me to actually realize and have that, I guess, self-awareness, and really sit down and reflect and have a hard conversation with myself to be like, what are you doing? What do you actually want? And if this is what you want, what do you need to shift and change? So I think that's something I work on a little bit with athletes now. It's having the self-awareness and having the accountability on yourself. Sometimes it's easier to point the finger at others of why things have gone wrong without actually looking inward first. At the end of the day, we have a choice. We always have a choice. We are choosing how we behave. You know, we're choosing whether to stay up late and go out with friends, or whether to go to bed because we have morning training. So I think that's a really important piece. Several conversations, I think, over time have come up with athletes, and sometimes parents too. I've worked a lot with parents as well. And something that's said a lot of the time is, you know, we make a lot of sacrifices. We have to sacrifice this or that. And I would challenge people to actually think about that framing. Because again, we have a choice. We haven't sacrificed, but we've actually chosen to step in a direction that's going to move us to where we want to be. So, yeah, you have to sacrifice things, of course, but no one's making you do that. No one is taking that away from you. You're just choosing what you want, because we know the input equals the output. And so that's something I talk about. A lot of work we do is on identity during the career now. So, you know, it's great, you train, you love your sport, you might be competing on the world stage, but that's you as an athlete. So who are you? What do you love to do? What are your passions? What are your strengths? Where can you see yourself in 10 years? What legacy do you want to leave behind? And I think some of the most important conversations are actually when people come into the high performance system and, you know, they're starting their journey, but actually being really quite honest. This is going to end. We're just at the beginning, but there will be an end. And the whole bit in the middle is probably going to be quite messy, and there's going to be highs and lows. And I always refer to my life as an elite athlete as a complete roller coaster, because 1 minute you're at the top and it's really high, and the next minute you're plummeting down, and there's a lot of twists and turns in the middle. But let's have some good conversation about what it might look like, about some of those transition points that you might experience over time. And let's talk about transition out and retirement, because unfortunately, sometimes you don't get to choose when to retire. Sometimes it's a forced retirement. Sometimes, I mean, I look back and I made a choice to retire, but I felt forced to retire. Again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and I've learned so much over the years. But looking back, had I have just leaned in to a few people around me, my old coach, had I have not been so stubborn, had I have done a bit more self-reflection, had I have not made a decision based off of the emotion I was feeling, you know, things could have been very different. But they weren't, and I've learned from that, and I'm grateful that finishing when I did and then going off, I actually left sport for about 3 years. I had nothing to do with sport, to go really figure myself out and find out what was important to me and take the time away that I needed. I wouldn't have ended up back here. So while I look back I think I'll always have some regrets, but I'm also very grateful for where it's ended. So it's really important to take time and just unpack and, yeah, figure out what do you want. And the biggest question, I think the one we always need to check in on ourselves on is, am I enjoying what I'm doing? Because if you're enjoying what you're doing, you'll be successful. And I'm not talking medals here. Like, I think my journey means more to me than the gold medals that are in my cupboard. I couldn't reel off all the achievements that I've, got. I have to go and dig them out and put the timeline together, because they weren't what I was chasing. I just loved being connected out there, experiencing the world stage and challenging myself.
Yeah, the self-awareness piece, especially around our choices, I feel like is so important. And you mentioned those sacrifices that are obvious objectively, but subjectively, when we see them as a sacrifice, just like parenting, you're like, oh, my life's finished now that I've had kids, and all that I'm sacrificing. And if we have that framework, there's friction the whole way, and it's going to be a struggle, and there's going to be regret, even if the journey is filled with lots of highs. But when we can just take a moment to go, what am I choosing here? And what I like to use the phrase, what am I investing in, as opposed to sacrificing? Then we become more empowered in what we're doing, and we actually end up being even more motivated about those choices, because we feel like we're investing in ourselves. And it's easy to sort of, I guess, have that perspective doing what we do and understanding human performance and in hindsight, but helping a young person have that perspective. I often feel that a lot of athletes at a younger age, they take on this maturity, or they have to be a bit more aware and a bit more mature than the average human growing up. And often there's an experiential cost to that, in the sense that other kids don't relate to that. Other kids don't have those perspectives. And so athletes can feel a little bit estranged from the world around them, because they're having to deal with things such as travel and international competition and these choices and this awareness and the discipline that other kids don't have to deal with, and other kids don't, I guess, relate to or can identify with that. And so there's often a loneliness or a separation felt in athletes from the real world. And so when that world comes crashing down, there's often this isolation and loneliness that these athletes can feel. And not even young athletes, a quarter of athletes who retire have some kind of mental health related issue. And a lot of this stems around this sort of identity of, well, who am I? And compared to the rest of the world, I don't relate. And who am I now? And if you were coaching the younger Sami at that period, who was feeling lost, unsure of their identity and isolated, what would you tell her?
I would tell her firstly to be kind to herself, and allow the time. And I think there's an element of it where it's almost like grief. You're grieving leaving this person behind. It sounds really odd, but and I'll come back to this, but even now, so my partner and I, we've been together 17 years, I think, engaged for about 14, and we're not married. And a big reason, I refuse to change my surname. And he's like, our kids have his surname. I've got 2 boys, they're Taylors. And he's like, why won't you change your name? Like, that's a part of getting married. And I'm like, but that's my identity. Like, I'm Sam Palmer, and there is still a bit of me. And I think I was Sam Palmer as the athlete, and that I sit and think about it sometimes, and I'm like, am I just still holding on to that athlete that was Sam Palmer? And and it's probably a big part of it. I've never quite figured it out, but it's just funny. we talk about it all the time. And the kid's like, Mum, you've got to be a Taylor. I said, why? I'm still your mum. It's just my name. But then I can't apply that same thing to but it is just a name. I don't lose the achievements. I don't lose my life as an athlete. Yeah, I won't. That's why I let go of that surname. But yeah, look, I would say time, allow yourself to feel the emotions. Don't make a decision until you've really dealt with those emotions, and do the work, do the internal work, spend the time to understand self and learn about yourself with what lights up your belly. What is it that makes you feel really alive and happy? What are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing? Because I think those things and our values, they really do help guide decision making. Again, I wish I had taken some time way back in 2007, instead of getting back from the World Championships in a complete emotional state as a broken athlete and just going, I quit, I'm done, I haven't enjoyed this for a couple of years, that's that. I wish I had sat in that space a bit longer and given myself some time and been kinder to myself. But we live and we learn. And I think for me, it really fuels my passion for the work I do now, in sharing some of my stories and helping athletes through those really grey, patchy, uncertain times.
It's an interesting question because, you said so much there, and it's also very different for each individual. And nowadays there is so much support out there and available. Like, people may not see it or have access to it, or when we're feeling in that isolated place, we tend to separate ourselves to reinforce that state and that feeling, and the work you do now, I think, is so important. And the fact that sporting associations and bodies have that head of wellbeing is fantastic, because it just allows that conversation to happen and allows funding and avenue for support and so forth. What do you see as the biggest issues out there at the moment with athletes and their well-being? What are the challenges that they're facing?
How long have you got? I think there's still a few challenges. There was a period of time where there was a lot of talk around dual career, and a real focus on athletes having, a career outside of being an athlete. But to manage the time and the commitment of both an elite sport and a career is very hard. And There are a few athletes who have done it incredibly well. It differs sport to sport because of the age in which athletes peak at and start performing on the international stage at. But, you know, we have surgeons and javelin throwers, and we have teachers and sprinters, and, you know, it can be done. However, I think sometimes athletes can get quite overwhelmed by the thought of needing to have a full career and a sport and manage time and recovery and training and finances. So for me, it's about creating that balance. I think it is very important to have something outside of sport, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-blown career, but a passion project or a part-time job like I did by waitressing, and it was so social because it allows that cognitive reset from your sport. And you don't carry the bad training session or the challenges you're facing in sport throughout the evening into your sleep and into the next morning. You know, you're actually giving yourself that cognitive switch off completely. And I think that's really key and really important. So I think it's just the approach and how we work with the individuals on that, because I think I've spoken to some athletes who feel this immense pressure to go to uni, to manage that, to have a career, know what they're doing. But I think there's ways to do it without adding that level of pressure. And then, of course, finance is always, a challenge in high performance sport, and being able to fund your training, have some play money.
Yeah, finance is such a struggle. I work with lots of elite athletes, and they're given like a budget of 14 grand a year, and they're having to live, train, eat off that, and obviously that's impossible. And so they're needing to do flips in the street and busk for money, or they're having to do whatever they can. As you said, you worked in the pub, you worked as a waitress, and you did whatever you could to make it work. But all of that adds stress, reduces recovery, adds tension, stops you really that high motivation, ability to be in flow each time you train, and that then has an effect in competition. It's a real challenge for athletes to keep that desire and that hunger, especially when you become so estranged from the usual way of everyone else, how they're growing up and what they're doing. It becomes this journey where at some stage you really start to question it. But almost in for a penny, in for a pound, you've dedicated so many years to it, people feel obliged to stay in it, because otherwise what's it all been for?
Yeah.
And if someone's feeling that, what kind of conversation would you have with them?
I think, again, it comes down to the individual, but it's really about asking them to be honest with themselves. I've supported a few athletes transitioning out, and I think sometimes inside they know they're ready to transition away from competition, but it's scary, and they're just not ready to really look at what the world outside of that is. They've been in their comfort space, and it's a comfort bubble. It's what you do, it's what you love. You have your family within your sport. So to think about stepping away from that, it's very scary. So again, it's those individual conversations on time. If staying connected to sport is important to you, what are some avenues, and what do you want that to look like? Especially more today, there's a lot of alumni programs, there's mentorship, there's coaching, there's judging. There's so many ways to stay connected in with the sport, but I just don't think the conversations are had enough. It took me 3-4 years nearly of going and traveling and exploring myself to know that, I'm not ready to leave elite sport. I love elite sport. And not because I've just done it and I think I should stay in it, but because I actually have a genuine passion for high performance. So I think they're all unique conversations. I don't think there's one framework, one conversation or one scenario that can fit all athletes, but it's being honest with self and discovering what it is you want. And not every elite athlete will want to stay in sport, or some conversations I have are, I really want to, but not now. And I would encourage people that if they know and they have the desire that they want to stay, but they also think they need that break, take the break. I think it's really important to look after self Take the break you need. The sport's not going anywhere. The door's not closing because you're finished being a competitor. There are so many other avenues to connect back in. And working in sport, we want those athletes to stay and connect in, because with them is a whole wealth of knowledge. You know, whether they've been 2 years, 5 years, 10 years in the sport, they have that lived experience that they can share back with our next generation. And we don't want that knowledge to walk out the door. So, you know, hand in hand with what we're doing in the wellbeing space is ensuring that athletes enjoy their time in sport. And again, it comes back to the enjoyment piece. Like, if you're not enjoying and loving the journey, then why are you still on it? So we want people to enjoy their time in sport. We want them to leave better placed than when they came in. So a lot of the work, even understanding self, these skills, values, time management, budgeting, leave with those skills, because they're also going to help you set up in your next chapter of the book. Some of the conversations are even with athletes on, do you realize how many of these skills you have? Because I think as an athlete, you're so just focused on performance, your recovery, doing everything around it that's going to make sure that you compete the way you want, that you don't actually realize that you're building this whole toolkit of skills that can transfer into life outside of competition. So there are a lot of conversations I have too. It's, you know, what are your strengths? Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, let's unpack that. Let's actually look at all the things that you've learned over your time as an elite athlete and how that can translate into real life scenarios.
But before we come to the end of the pod, because the time's run away with itself, I'm curious to hear with the position that you're in, how that culture of high performance is being created these days. Yeah, coming back to that last conversation, my experience with a lot of athletes who just don't want to compete anymore, or they've had enough, or they're burnt out, or, you know, it's often that it's not that they don't love the sport, is the way they've been approaching competition is being really unhelpful and self-sabotaging, in the sense that they've grown up in a culture of just push harder, you know, negate your own emotional awareness in order to perform better. And there's this, you've got to grind through it, got to push harder, got to be more combative, and there's that sort of tension that builds up. And then when competition's over, there's that relief. It's like, oh. And there's almost like an addiction of, I need to compete, but I don't want to compete. I've got all this dread and performance anxiety. And then it finishes and like, oh, thank God it's finished. And I'm never going to do that again. And then straight away you're on to the next competition.
Like an addiction.
And it cycles and it cycles and it cycles. And often that being fueled by these sort of sports coaches who were working off that 1970s sports psychology playbook of no pain, no gain, and survival of the fittest and so forth. And not because it's their fault, it's just what they were taught and what they've inherited. And I'm curious, with you in your position now as that sort of head of wellbeing, and now in two different arenas, how do you see that high performance culture changing? And do you feel like there is that growth, there is that current research that's being filtered down into that new culture?
Definitely. I think there is a big shift to a person-first approach, but it goes for coaches too. So we're not just working with athletes, we're working with coaches, because coach burnout is also very prevalent. I think, and I come from an era where it was, results and results-based, results-driven, no pain, no gain, definitely. But I think organically through having the jobs, doing things outside of sport. I'm a very social person, so making sure there was always time for social. I did naturally just build those pockets outside so that there was a balance, because for me, and working with athletes and coaches now, I think getting the balance right is important. Yes, there is a high level of commitment. Yes, it is going to be very hard at times and it's not pain-free, but what is important, we're looking after mind and body outside of sport. There is a lot of research that suggests that when our domains are balanced and when we're healthy outside, we perform better, and we do. So if we're only solely focusing on performance and outcome, we're actually doing a disservice to our people and we won't get the results we want. So I think the approach now, person first, balancing well, it is looking at those other domains that sit outside. And I think what's often missed is if we don't focus on those, and, we've got relationships outside of our sport that may be breaking down because we're not putting any focus towards them, it's like a domino effect. So whilst your sport might be going well and your relationships outside of sport or your finances or, any of these other areas are crumbling away, that's going to have the domino effect and impact our performance anyway. So it's really important that we're knowing what sits outside of those and nurturing all of them. Because when we do that, that's when the magic happens. And that's when the performances will come and be sustainable. So, there's the longevity piece. It's not, let's put all our eggs here and get that one result. Like, we actually want sustainable performance. And the way to do that is by looking after well-being.
So many great nuggets to take away there. In coming to the end of the pod, I always ask a couple of questions. A book or a film that has either changed your life or been hugely impactful for you?
I think it's been said a number of times on your poddy. James Clear, Atomic Habits, is definitely one. I think if you haven't read it, you need to read it. If you have read it, go back through it. I think every time I read it, I pick up something a little different out of it. And the other book I really actually quite enjoy is The Magic of the Metaphor. I think it's Mark Owen. I love a metaphor because I think it's a very good way to relate to a situation, but by removing emotion. And it sometimes brings those aha moments that you look for sometimes in a conversation. So that's another really great one.
Yeah, I must check that out. It's amazing how a story or a metaphor or an analogy can just loosen those structures we hold and make us not so protective about it, and can really allow us to see the insight there. Yeah, awesome.
Time to flip the mic.
Yeah, I could ask you so many, but I will today ask you, what, in your opinion, is the most important for longevity in sport?
At an elite level, I imagine you're talking about,
Yeah.
I feel like there's two answers to that, and one would obviously be the physicality of it, right? If we don't, talking to someone, you're talking to someone whose body is built to get injured as quickly as possible. Looking after your biomechanics, really looking after that kind of more structural piece and that core, so the external limbs and everything don't compensate and add pressure, and you do really well and suddenly find yourself injured. So testing from a biomechanical and physiological point of view, I think is super important for longevity. But from a more psychological perspective, I think our relationship with pressure, coming back to what I was saying earlier, if our relationship with pressure and stress and competition is one of grit and one of pushing through, then ultimately all the things you talked about, that enjoyment is going to go. The outcome's going to come so important, we're going to start fusing things to that outcome that doesn't need to be fused, be it self-identity, what have you. We're going to not perform our best under those pressured situations, and the higher you get and the older you get and the more elite the situation gets, the more the pressure comes. And so I so often see talented athletes, go by the wayside. They turn to sex, drugs and rock and roll. They turn to anything other than that continued competition because they have a relationship with pressure that isn't helpful, and sometimes even unhealthy. But if we can learn to love pressure, if we can learn to see it as that chrysalis to new ability, if we can learn to see it as the pathway for growth and everything that mastery contains, and we can see it as a context to find our flow, then suddenly we're attracted to it. We invite it, and it doesn't become this daunting thing. It becomes the highlight of what we're doing. And that, I think, sustains athletes to come back again and again and again and want more and revel in the challenge. And so I'd say, from what I see, that seems to make a huge difference as to their desire to sustain the performance, at least.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Sami. Great to chat.
Oh, you're welcome. It was really great. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. On reflection of this conversation, a few golden nuggets have emerged for me. Sami's early success wasn't built purely on talent or discipline. It was fueled by intrinsic enjoyment, strong team culture, and a sense of playfulness. She consistently highlights loving the sport, supportive peer relationships, keeping training light and fun, and focusing on the process rather than obsessing over outcomes. Her gold medal performance came after she had already achieved her goal of making the final, and by doing so removed any internal pressure. And this reinforces a key performance principle. When intrinsic enjoyment and autonomy are present, performance often thrives. Secondly, what I found interesting and the most powerful turning point in the conversation was Sami's identity crisis following injury and retirement. When sport became her entire identity, injury triggered emotional derailment, retirement created a deep loss of self. She experienced isolation, confusion, and grief. And Sami paints an amazing picture of when we fuse who we are with what we do, losing the role can feel like losing ourselves. And now, in her Wellbeing leadership role, she emphasizes developing identity beyond sport, building passions and skills outside competition, preparing athletes early for transition, and encouraging reflection before making emotional decisions. This highlights the psychological necessity of a person-first high-performance culture. And lastly, she talks about sustainable high performance requiring balance and well-being. Her comments strongly challenge the old no pain, no gain models. Sustainable excellence comes from a balanced sense of well-being, not from grinding harder. And as Sami described, modern high-performance cultures are shifting towards person-first coaching, balanced life domains, financial and emotional support, open conversations about a potential transition or burnout, and sustainable rather than short-term results. And when athletes can nurture their relationships, their identity and life outside sport, performance becomes more resilient and longevity increases. I hope you got a golden nugget too. Thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to get notified when our next episode drops. The more people that subscribe, the better I can make the show for you. Equally, please leave a review. Your review will go a long way to helping others find this pod. Until the next time, thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed.